Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, imagine a master chef, right? Unknowingly giving away their Michelin star recipe. Or a microscopic Trojan horse literally tricking a living cell into swallowing a synthetic drug.
It sounds like science fiction, honestly.
Exactly. But today, we are bypassing the usual small talk and just diving straight into the paper. We've got a massive deep dive lined up for you, looking at 8 major sources across the editorial, opinion, science, text and context, and business sections.
There is a lot to cover.
There really is. Our mission today is to unpack the hidden threads of power, control, and disruption that are running through both the global and domestic landscape right now.
Right.
So we're jumping right into the editorial section, starting with a look inside a suddenly, well, very turbulent China. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
It's like looking at a massive monolithic fortress from the outside, But suddenly, if you look really closely, you notice all this frantic repair work happening on the inner walls.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Under President Xi Jinping, we are seeing some major internal purges. We're talking about the sudden removal of General Zhang Yuxia. He's the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission.
A very powerful figure.
Extremely. And the language used in the People's Liberation Army Daily was incredibly severe. I mean, they literally called him a toxin that had to be incised.
Yeah, that phrasing is telling. I mean, when a state-run publication uses biological language like toxin and incise regarding a top-tier general, it clearly signals a systemic perceived threat.
Wow.
And he wasn't alone either. General Liu Zhenli was also removed from the highest policymaking body alongside, I believe, 9 military lawmakers. And that includes the ground force commander.
That is a massive sweep.
It is. Now, the official narrative leans heavily on anti-corruption. However, looking at the historical mechanism of the Communist Party of China, there's a different underlying current here.
Right, because I have to push back on that official line. Are these really just, standard anti-corruption purges, or is this a desperate move to snuff out political opposition because the Chinese economy is faltering and people are just getting restless?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, history really provides a blueprint. During Mao's era, the infamous Liu Shaoqi episode was essentially an abortive challenge to Mao's supremacy, which was framed later as an ideological purge.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and we saw similar maneuvers under Deng Xiaoping. What the geopolitical analysis points to right now is a severe trust deficit within the upper echelons of the party leadership.
So they don't trust each other.
Exactly. Belief in the overarching economic goals is declining. So when the economic outlook dims, snuffing out high-level opposition becomes just a raw measure of regime survival.
And this internal tension seems to be drastically altering their global posture, too. I mean, they've suffered some major dent to their credibility on the world stage recently.
They absolutely have.
Like in Venezuela. Despite pouring in massive investments, China completely failed to counter the U.S. when the American administration asserted dominance over the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
And they also failed to protect Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, in West Asia, which led to some very unfavorable comparisons between Chinese and Western weaponry.
It shatters the carefully contrived illusion that China provides a protective umbrella equal to the West. But notice the behavioral shift here.
What do you mean?
Instead of the belligerent wolf warrior diplomacy we've come to expect, Beijing is showing unusual reticence. Take the recent maritime development. A Chinese cargo ship completed a voyage through the Arctic Ocean in just 14 days.
Which usually takes, what, 3 weeks through the Suez Canal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, in previous years, Beijing would have blanketed state media with triumphant proclamations about a new polar Silk Road.
Oh, for sure. Parades and everything.
Right. But this time, they downplayed it. They simply said it contributed to supply chain stability.
So they are actively keeping their heads down.
They are strategically minimizing friction. They want to avoid ruffling Western feathers while they deal with these internal inner devils. And honestly, a more circumspect, inward-focused China, rather than an aggressively expansionist one, actually alters the global calculus.
How so?
Well, for India specifically, it could even lower border temperatures and signal a potential, albeit cautious, return to the Hindi-Chini-Pai-Pai dynamic of peaceful coexistence.
Wow, okay. That inward focus really changes the whole geopolitical chessboard. But, while military posturing might be quieting down, there's another kind of arms race heating up in the editorial section.
The AI race.
Exactly. One that doesn't use missiles, but algorithms.
Up there.
So American AI lab Anthropic is actively pushing to label 3 major Chinese AI labs, DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, and Minimax, as national security threats.
The accusation driving this is a process called distillation.
Which sounds complicated, but
It's actually quite straightforward. Anthropic claims these Chinese labs used 16 million exchanges from about 24,000 fraudulent accounts to constantly query Anthropic's frontier model, Claude. They then used those high-quality, sophisticated outputs from Claude to train and improve their own, initially weaker models.
so distillation is essentially that master chef analogy we mentioned earlier.
Yes.
A rival chef unknowingly gets taught the secret recipe simply by being served thousands of meals, and they just reverse engineer the dish.
That's spot on.
The U.S. wants to treat this like nuclear proliferation and lock down the technology. But Anthropic is currently facing its own controversy.
They are.
Their models are reportedly being used by the U.S. military to fast-track the kill chain for target identification in places like Iran. If the U.S. military is using these models for lethal operations without corporate guardrails, doesn't Anthropic's moral argument against China completely collapse?
Well, you cannot easily equate generative AI to nuclear weapons, and the analysis highlights the hypocrisy of trying to do so. I mean, nuclear nonproliferation works because fissile material is physical, rare, and traceable.
Right, you can actually track uranium.
Exactly. AI is a dual-use, general-purpose technology rooted in mathematics. It's much more akin to semiconductors. And the definitive proof that input-based restrictions and export controls fail is DeepSeek itself.
Because they bypass the restrictions.
They managed to achieve comparable performance to Western frontier models at a fraction of the computing cost, despite facing massive semiconductor export controls.
Because talent is mobile. You can't put a trade embargo on human knowledge.
Precisely. The researchers at these Chinese labs were often trained in American universities. Furthermore, equating model distillation to industrial-scale intellectual property theft is a structurally fragile argument.
Why is that?
Think about how these frontier AI models from companies like Anthropic and OpenAI were built in the first place. They were themselves trained by scraping the creative and intellectual output of millions of people across the internet.
Who never consented.
You never consented and were never compensated.
Wow, so they scraped the entire internet for free, and now they are sounding the alarm because someone is scraping their specific outputs.
The irony is palpable. Additionally, when Anthropic raised internal concerns about how the Pentagon was utilizing its tech for targeting, the company was reportedly labeled a supply chain risk.
Wait, a supply chain risk? Isn't that a term usually reserved for foreign adversaries?
It is. Corporate guardrails evaporate when faced with state military objectives. We don't need corporate monopolies hiding behind national security. The analysis argues we need universal, plurilateral state commitments regarding the responsible use of AI, especially concerning lethal autonomous systems.
So we have corporations trying to write the rules for global AI on the fly, and clearly failing.
Definitely failing.
But even when rules are explicitly etched into a national constitution, enforcing them requires an impartial referee.
Right.
Moving over to the opinion section, that brings us to a massive test of rule enforcement currently unfolding in India's parliament. A very rare no-confidence motion has been moved against the Lok Sabha Speaker, Om Birla.
This procedural event really strikes at the absolute core of parliamentary democracy.
It's a huge deal.
Because the speaker isn't just a moderator, they wield immense constitutional power. I mean, they certify money bills which completely bypass the upper house.
Oh, wow.
They rule on the disqualification of legislators. They are expected to be the ultimate impartial arbiter, rising entirely above the party politics that got them elected in the first place.
So the speaker is literally the referee in a high-stakes football match. And the moment the ref is perceived as biased, the entire game descends into chaos.
Exactly.
But how do we protect this office from the growing perception of politicization? Because if I remember correctly, the rules to actually remove a speaker are incredibly strict.
They are. Article 94C of the Constitution sets a towering threshold, and it's deliberately designed to protect the office from routine, frivolous political pressure.
What are the steps?
First, a member must give 14 days written notice. Then, the motion needs the support of at least 50 members just to be admitted for a basic discussion.
Okay, that sounds doable.
But finally, and most crucially, it requires a majority of all the members of the Lok Sabha to pass, not just a majority of those present and voting on that particular day.
So the threshold is deliberately massive, so you can't just fire the referee every time you get a yellow card.
Exactly.
And historically, this almost never happens, right?
It has only been attempted 3 times since independence. in 1954, 1966, and 1987.
Did any of them pass?
All three motions failed. The underlying issue today isn't that the constitutional threshold needs to be lowered. The issue is that the unwritten parliamentary conventions that historically guided the Speaker's impartial conduct are eroding.
It's becoming too polarized.
Yes. As political competition intensifies, procedural decisions are increasingly viewed through a partisan lens. To restore trust, the system requires structured, mandatory consultations between the government and the opposition, and absolute transparency.
Meaning they have to explain their calls.
Right. When a speaker rejects a request for discussion, clear, recorded explanations must be provided.
It's all about navigating incredibly strict constitutional bottlenecks. But speaking of strict bottlenecks, if we flip over to the science section, researchers are figuring out how to bypass physical barriers at the microscopic level.
This is a fascinating leap.
This piece from the journal Nature is mind-blowing. Researchers at ETH Zurich and TU Munich have figured out how to hijack the nutrient gate of E. coli bacteria.
To appreciate the magnitude of this, you have to understand the biological bottleneck in protein synthesis.
Okay, walk us through it.
Scientists can create thousands of incredible artificial amino acids in a laboratory, but to get a living cell to actually use those artificial components to build a designer protein, you have to physically get those amino acids inside the cell.
Right.
The problem is artificial amino acids are highly hydrophilic, meaning they love water.
Right. But the core of a cell membrane is hydrophobic. It repels water. So these synthetic parts just bounce right off the outside of the cell.
They do. It's a huge barrier. So the researchers engineered a biological workaround focusing on an ABC transporter.
What's that?
This is a specific membrane protein in E. coli that basically acts as a feeding tube. It naturally imports short natural chains of amino acids called tripeptides and tetrapeptides for the bacteria to eat.
Wait, just to make sure we're all on the same page for you listening, scientists have been trying to get drugs into cells for decades. What makes this specific method different from what we've tried before?
Well, instead of trying to force the artificial component through the membrane, they disguised it.
Oh.
They tucked the artificial amino acid right in the middle of a natural short peptide chain.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This is the microscopic Trojan horse we talked about at the beginning.
Yes.
They are literally hiding weird artificial biological parts inside a normal-looking protein snack so the cell swallows it willingly.
That is exactly what happens. The cell's transporter grabs the whole package, assuming it's food, and pulls it inside.
Unbelievable.
Once it's safely inside the cell, the bacteria's own natural enzymes chop up the peptide, unwittingly freeing the artificial amino acid to be used by the cell's machinery.
They tricked it.
They did. They even managed to mutate this transporter so it takes up 10 times more of these artificial parts than it naturally would.
Now, what's the end goal here? What does this let us do?
It allows for the mass production of designer proteins with pinpoint accuracy. Imagine producing an antibody where you can attach a potent, targeted cancer drug to one precise microscopic spot on the protein.
Oh, wow.
It completely bypasses decades of inefficient laboratory bottlenecks.
That is incredible. But, while scientists are brilliantly manipulating these microscopic gateways to enrich living cells, state governments in India are finding their own financial gateways blocked.
A very different kind of bottleneck.
Yeah, that takes us into today's text and context section, where we're looking at a massive structural bottleneck regarding the 16th Finance Commission.
The Ministry of Finance recently issued an explanatory memorandum regarding the Commission's recommendations. And the headline number that the union government accepted is retaining the state's share in the divisible tax pool at 41%.
But 41% of what? Because the analysis points out that the pie is getting smaller before the states even get a slice.
That's the critical issue.
The union levies specific cesses and surcharges, which are essentially special purpose taxes, and they keep 100% of those revenues. They sit completely outside this divisible pool.
Right.
Back in the 13th Finance Commission, the divisible pool was about 89% of gross tax revenues. By the 15th, it dropped to 78%. So if you are a taxpayer living in a state like Punjab or Bihar, what does this actually mean for the roads you drive on or the local schools in your neighborhood?
Well, it means the state government has structurally fewer resources to fund local infrastructure, regardless of what the headline 41% figure suggests.
Because 41% of a smaller pie is still less money.
Precisely. The Commission recognized this shrinking pool, yet declined to enforce a fix. Furthermore, they deferred all the major structural reforms.
Like what?
Amending the fiscal responsibility legislation, controlling off-budget borrowings, reforming power sector distribution companies, these were all noted but essentially punted down the road.
And we have to talk about the massive shift in the distribution formula itself. They replaced tax effort, which used to have a 2.5% weight, with GDP contribution, which now carries a massive 10% weight.
Significant structural change.
If a state like Punjab is already borrowing money just to pay basic government salaries, and the new formula explicitly rewards states that are already wealthy with high GDPs, like Maharashtra and Gujarat, aren't we just hard-coding a massive wealth gap into the Constitution?
When you look at it impartially, it is a profound inversion of traditional fiscal equalization logic. The previous system rewarded states for the administrative effort of collecting taxes. The new one simply rewards existing economic weight. When you analyze the pattern of the explanatory memorandum, a clear mechanism emerges. The union accepts what gives it predictability, like the formula, the 41% share, but deliberately defers anything that requires sharing structural authority. The result is a system that perpetuates center-state asymmetry, leaving the structural financial stress on the poorer states completely unresolved.
This kind of tension over resource control and political interference, it can have devastating long-term effects. In fact, staying in the text and context section, if we look back to 1989, we can see how just a few months of political friction completely derailed India's technological future.
The story of CDOT. It's a tragedy, really.
We're looking at the rise and fall of CDOT. Tell us about that.
To understand the gravity of this, picture India's communication infrastructure in the 1980s.
Okay.
It was practically non-existent for the average citizen. There was a staggering waiting list of over 8.42 lakh people just to get a basic landline installed.
Just a landline.
Right. The country relied entirely on expensive, imported multinational technology that frequently broke down because it wasn't designed for Indian heat, dust, or high call volumes.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. So in 1986, the government launched the Center for Development of Telematics, or CDOT, led by Sam Pitroda.
And they gave them an assured budget of 36 crore rupees and a tight 36-month timeline to build an indigenous digital switch from scratch, just to bypass those foreign monopolies.
A highly ambitious goal.
But they were actually doing it. They brought in brilliant young engineers and created an unprecedented flexible work culture.
They did.
But then the government changed. In December 1989, K.P. Unnikrishnan became the communications minister, and he launched a politically motivated witch hunt against the project.
He publicly humiliated the leadership and formed an investigative committee.
Despite previous technical committees fully clearing CDOT of any wrongdoing, and despite a formal dissent note from actual telecom experts on this new committee, the minister sacked the dissenting engineers.
Unbelievable.
Including the executive director, G.B. Mamansi.
He sacked the technical experts who disagreed with his political narrative. How could 3 months of political vindictiveness destroy years of indigenous innovation? We essentially handed our massive telecom market back to foreign companies on a silver platter.
The mechanism of destruction here is a timeless lesson. Indigenous technology development requires absolute functional autonomy.
It has to be protected. It must have immunity from changing political winds. Because of that brief period of interference, there was a mass exodus of scientists from CDOT.
You just left.
It triggered a classic brain drain, with those brilliant Indian engineers taking their expertise straight to the very multinational corporations that CDOT was originally created to compete against.
That is heartbreaking.
Oh.
And the devastating historical cost of neglecting indigenous tech contrasts incredibly sharply with what's happening in China right now. Let's move into the business section, where China is forcefully injecting indigenous AI into every single sector of its economy to stave off a crisis.
Yes, China is staring down a massive demographic cliff. They have 300 million people set to retire in the next decade.
300 million.
Yes, and their GDP growth target has dropped to its lowest point since the 1990s at around 4.5 to 5%. To offset the shrinking workforce, policymakers are going all in on automation.
All right.
They are pushing a narrative that AI will be a sunrise industry that will create jobs for the 12.7 million university graduates entering the market this year.
See, I have to push back on that official narrative. We are reading about entrepreneurs in China building one-person companies, using AI agents like OpenClaw to completely automate entire e-commerce operations.
Right.
Robotaxis are already on the streets, and video generation models like Seedance 2.0 are replacing creative workers. If one person can do the job of 50 using AI, isn't this job creation line just a forced, optimistic narrative masking a massive youth unemployment crisis?
What's fascinating here is the stark disconnect between the state rhetoric and the ground reality.
Exactly.
The government is actively trying to avoid panic by framing AI as a tool for economic renaissance. Universities are hastily introducing AI micromajors to teach critical thinking, desperately trying to keep human workers relevant.
But is it working?
Well, the mechanism of technological disruption dictates that job destruction almost always outpaces job creation in the short term. The IMF warns AI will impact up to 40 to 60% of all jobs globally.
That is terrifying for young graduates.
It is. Unless China implements massive structural investments in human capital, or even explores radical concepts like universal basic income, the automation shock to their youth will be severe. They are trying to innovate their way out of a demographic crisis, but they might be accelerating an employment one.
But China's massive industrial overdrive isn't staying within its own borders. That resulting scale has created an export juggernaut that is now driving straight into the heart of Europe's heavy industry, which is our final story in the business section today.
The EV truck market.
Yes, we are looking at the influx of Chinese electric trucks into the EU.
The global market is already familiar with Chinese passenger EVs, but now heavy freight trucks from Chinese manufacturers like BYD, Sany, Windrose, and Farazin are rolling into Europe.
And the price disruption is staggering, isn't it?
It's massive. They are pricing their zero-emission trucks up to 30% below the European average, and that average is around 320,000 euros.
To put that in perspective for you, it's like a restaurant that owns its own farms, its own delivery trucks, and its own power grid, competing against a local restaurant that has to rent absolutely everything.
That's a very apt analogy.
The European legacy brands, companies like Volvo, Daimler, Volkswagen, aren't just losing on the sticker price, they're losing on the entire invisible supply chain beneath it.
That is the exact mechanism of their advantage. It all comes down to unprecedented domestic scale.
How big is their scale?
In China, 29% of domestic heavy trucks are already zero emission. They have spent over a decade building a massive, low-cost battery and EV supply chain that Europe simply hasn't developed yet.
Wow.
For context, electric freight trucks made up merely 4.2% of overall truck sales in the EU recently, primarily because European electric models cost triple the price of a standard diesel truck.
Triple the price. So the European legacy automakers are trapped. What is their strategy? They can't just surrender the continent's freight network.
Recognizing they cannot compete purely on supply chain economics right now, European brands are pivoting to defense.
Meaning lobbying.
Exactly. Trade groups are aggressively lobbying the European Commission for protectionist policies. They are demanding lower highway tolls specifically for their trucks, strict freight mandates, and crucially, government subsidies that are tied strictly to European production.
Are these subsidies actually happening?
Yes. We recently saw a $95 million Dutch subsidy program that was entirely oversubscribed in a single day. They are basically using government policy and taxpayer money as a defensive shield against foreign innovation. And, if we look back at the breadth of what we've covered today, from the internal political purges stabilizing the monolithic fortress of China, to the microbial Trojan horses engineered to hack living cells, to the financial formulas dictating state wealth, we spend so much of our collective effort trying to control incredibly complex systems.
We really do.
But as we forcefully hand more of our global economy over to artificial intelligence and deeply entangled supply chains, we really have to ask, at what point do the systems we built to serve us become the very forces that control us?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.